What's up, preppers? Welcome back to another video. All over the news at the moment, we are seeing tensions with Russia, between ourselves, between the United States, between Ukraine, and all these different countries and NATO, and different tensions and conflicts rising all over the place. We've even seen our Prime Minister talk about boots on the ground, talking about going to war, etc. We've had conscription talks, we've had all sorts. So, how would this pan out? How is it already panning out? I asked AI how a war between the UK and Russia would stack up and how that would look on a timeline, just to see how close to the current events it would be and looking into the future, how likely this is. So, we're going to have a look at what AI has said about this and what we think about that for each section as well. So, of course, the prompt here was to speculate of a timeline between the war between the UK and Russia and how that could pan out over a period of time. No set period of time, mind. I left that open for interpretation. So it's done this in stages. So we're going to look at stage one first, which is escalation and diplomatic breakdown, which is the start of most conflicts. So tensions rise. This is what the AI says. Diplomatic tensions between the UK and Russia would likely escalate due to an event like a cyber attack, territorial dispute, possibly over the Baltics or Ukraine. Well, obviously. The military incidents such as airspace violations and naval confrontations, these tensions would spill over into broader European and NATO concerns. Sounds very familiar already. Still in stage one, diplomatic channels close. As tensions mount, diplomatic talks would break down. International bodies like the UN, the European Union might try to mediate, but Russia's distrust of the West and the UK's strong NATO alignment would make resolution very difficult. And still in this stage one is where we start to see cyber warfare and economic sanctions. Both sides would engage in cyber attacks targeting critical infrastructure, power grids, communications, defense networks. Economic sanctions would intensify, with Russia's energy exports targeted and the UK facing severe disruptions to trade. Now, that's the end of stage one. I think we are in that, and I think we are starting to get towards the end of that. I genuinely think these banks that happen to be having problems a lot in the last month or two is down to these cyber attacks. I personally have servers hosting different things for different people, and we've had more attacks in the last 6 months than we've had in the whole 5 or 6 years that they've been running. Cyber attacks in general are intensifying because they just are, but I do think targeted ones by state actors and things like that could massively increase. We are going to sanction Russia more. We are currently looking at seizing assets to pay for Ukraine, Russian assets in this country, which is going to make them want to retaliate. And how do you retaliate without actually firing a missile, causing World War III? Cyber attacks, plausible deniability. And our infrastructure, especially our power grid, is so brittle at the moment. This could be actually quite devastating for us. That's the end of stage one, what the AI said and what I think about it. Let me know what you think about it. Feel free to comment all the way through this. Just say stage one and say your comment. Then you can press play and we can go on to stage two, initial confrontation. We're talking about physical confrontation here. So this would be a period of days and weeks after the stage one, clearly. So the point one from the AI is naval and air engagements. Russia might escalate by sending warships into the North Sea or positioning forces in the Baltic region. The UK Royal Navy alongside NATO forces would likely patrol the area, potentially leading to skirmishes, airstrikes, drone attacks might also occur, targeting military bases or supply lines. Missile strikes and border skirmishes. Russia could launch targeted missile strikes against strategic military sites in the UK or neighbouring NATO countries like Estonia and Poland. In response, the UK might retaliate with airstrikes against the Russian military installations in Ukraine, Syria, or Russia's western military districts. Still on what AI said, cyber and information warfare. Both nations would likely engage in full-scale cyber warfare by this point, with Russia targeting UK financial institutions and critical infrastructure, while the UK attempts to disrupt Russian military communications and defense systems. So the cyber warfare is continuing to escalate, and we've got initial one missile here, strike there. What it doesn't say there, which I think is a key point in this, is the sabotage that would also be involved in this. Towards the end of stage 1 and the start of stage 2, I think we'd be looking at sabotage in the UK, and of course of the data cables and power cables that run across the oceans. We've already seen it where trawlers have dragged their anchors across these cables and how easily it can be done. So I think we'd see a lot of disruptions like that, as well as people that are probably already in this country who are in support of somebody else may set a fire. There might be sabotage on our factories down south where they're producing Storm Shadow missiles. You could start to see lots of little acts of sabotage over the country that the mainstream media might initially play off as, oh, there's an accident. Oh, there's a tragic accident with a fire. This has happened. That's happened. But it will start to stack up and mount up. And clearly, that's going to be orchestrated by somebody. So that's one thing they don't mention in here. I think the most extreme bit in here is the missile strikes, because that is not something that you can play off. Naval and air skirmishes. We have near misses like that a lot of the time, and it could be written off like, oh, they shot at us, so we shot at them. Okay, let's not go any further. So that might be a non-escalatory thing, but it could happen. But the missile strikes and border skirmishes, that is, we are at war at that stage. So that's stage 2. Let me know what you think of stage 2. I think it's realistic, especially on the cyber warfare and information warfare front. Add the naval and air engagements, by all means, think by that stage, yes, we could be at that stage. Missile strikes, I think we're a bit further on there. I think by the time we get to missile strikes, we're at full-scale war. Let me know what you think of stage 2. Stage 3, full-scale conflict. And this says it would last weeks to months. So we'll see. I'm not sure. Maybe they thought the same about the Ukraine conflict, and that's gone on for years. So it depends on how it's run, I suppose. Let's have a look at what AI says about stage 3 here, full-scale conflict. NATO's involvement. The UK, as a NATO member, would invoke Article 5 of the NATO treaty if Russia targets UK territory directly. This would draw NATO into the conflict, likely drawing in countries like the US, France, Germany, and others. NATO collective defense against Russia aggression would escalate the war. Now, we'll touch on that in a minute. I know what you're thinking. Let's carry on with this first. Conventional warfare, the UK would focus on defending its homeland and strengthening defenses in Europe. Russia might target NATO supplies, particularly in the Baltics, while the UK would support Ukrainian forces launching airstrikes and providing weapons to counter Russian advances. Already happening. Ground battles and special operations. The UK's military would be involved in defending Eastern Europe and potentially Ukraine. There could be heavy air-ground battles, especially in areas like the Donbass region along the Black Sea. Both sides would likely deploy special forces for sabotage and intelligence operations. So they're talking about that stage 3 is full-scale war. That's what AI is saying is full-scale war. Yet part of that was the UK would support Ukrainian forces launching airstrikes and providing weapons to counter Russian advances. We are talking about doing that now. That's on the that's not off the table. That is on the table now. And that is saying that's a stage 3 thing at full scale conflict. And yes, the key point in that at the start as well was NATO and Article 5. How accurate, how much will Article 5 be used and ignored is anyone's guess. But drawing in countries like the US, that might be completely off the table now. We've seen what's happened in recent news, recent events. Donald's going to sit back and let us do it ourselves. And that's the biggest player in NATO. So let me know what you think of stage 3. I think the scary thing about stage 3, as much as that's probably accurate for full-scale war, is there's a couple of points there that's already happening. We're already in it. Stage 4, global involvement and escalation. This is months to a year. This is a full year this could last. Global economy collapses. This is what AI is predicting for stage 4. A prolonged war between the UK and Russia would severely disrupt the global economy. Oil and gas prices would skyrocket, and economic ties with Russia would diminish, causing a global recession. Food shortages might develop due to disruption of trade routes, especially in Europe. I would have expected disruption on food and stuff like that well before this. Second point for this is China's position. As a global power, China would likely stay neutral at first, but it may begin to push its own agenda in the South China Sea or other regions, leveraging the distraction in Europe. There could also be a proxy wars with regions like Africa, Central Asia, where both Russian and the West have interests. Yeah, we've talked about that China are looking for an excuse to then, it's going to happen if all this is going on. We've not even talked about North Korea and South Korea, because that could be a massive escalation on this front as well while all this is going on. Point 3 on stage 4 is nuclear threat. As casualties and military losses mount, the risk of nuclear escalation would rise. Russia might threaten to use tactical nuclear weapons in a bid to turn the tide, while NATO would counter this with strong deterrent strategy. The world would be on high alert for possible nuclear confrontation, which could drastically change the course of the war. They're not saying anybody had pushed the button. But is that AI saying nobody's that stupid? But this is AI. It's logical. Humans aren't. Humans are flawed. Back somebody into a corner, you might hit that button. Scary times. That's stage 4. And yeah, I think stuff like the trade routes disruption and food shortages would have happened way before this. Like 60% of what's on our plates is usually imported in this country. We don't grow a lot of our own stuff, even less so that the farms are starting to be killed off. That's another rant completely. But yeah, we're not self-sufficient when it comes to food at all. So I think we'd have seen disruptions well before this. But yeah, everything else I'm quite on board with. I think China's position likely to take advantage. I think they would have took advantage at an earlier stage as well. We wouldn't be at stage 4. They'd have already done that at stage 2 or 3. So let me know what you think of stage 4 from the AI there, and how accurate that is and what you think could be different. Now, here's the optimistic side. Stage 5, AI says stalemate and negotiation. After months of fighting, both sides may reach a stalemate. The economic and the human cost of the war would become unbearable, especially for Russia, which would suffer under sanctions and military losses. Pressure from the international community, along with the threat of further nuclear escalation, might force both parties to the negotiating table. Shouldn't that have happened in the current war already? End of major fighting. A ceasefire or peace agreement could be brokered through international mediation, perhaps by China or a neutral party, if they're neutral at that stage, if there is anybody neutral at that stage. Territorial disputes and military withdrawals would be central issues in peace talks. NATO would likely push for a demilitarization zone in Eastern Europe, and Russia might demand the lifting of sanctions in exchange for concessions. And then point 3 on that is post-war reconstruction and tensions. Both the UK and Russia would face a long recovery period. The war would reshape European alliances, with Russia likely seeking closer ties with China and non-Western countries. The UK, backed by NATO, would focus on rebuilding Europeans' military defences. However, deep mistrust would linger and a new arms race might develop. So that's stage 5. I think that's very optimistic. That says months to years is the timeline for that. So that's probably, if you end up in full-scale war, that's probably the best case scenario at the end of it. Not a case of someone's beaten into submission, somebody's beaten into surrender completely, somebody's backed into a corner and presses a button. I do think that's the very diplomatic, very British ending. So what do you think of that? If it got past 1, 2, 3, 4 that we've just spoke about, stage 5, is that accurate? Or could you see it fire, brimstone, and that's it, the end? Mutually assured destruction. Scary. A sub note to this, at the bottom, it does say for the AI, says potential key factors influencing the outcome. So let's just cover these before we end. Number 1, nuclear deterrence. Both the UK and Russia possess nuclear arsenals, which would act as a significant deterrent from escalating to full-scale nuclear war. But tactical nuclear weapons could be considered if conventional forces fail to achieve strategic goals. So, going back on itself there, saying could be used. And let's be fair, let's be honest with ourselves. How much of a deterrent is Trident at the moment? The last 3, 4, 5, God knows how many tests have failed. I'm not saying their nuclear arsenal is in tip-top condition, but they've got a better chance of working than ours has, purely based on the numbers. Is it still a deterrent? And would our current Prime Minister be the man that would be willing to strike back? You know, a deterrent is only a deterrent if the threat is there. If you have no confidence that the leader of the other country would ever retaliate, strike, or anything like that, would ever press the button, it's no longer a deterrent. Is our Prime Minister the man that would press the button if he needed to? I don't have that much faith. Global alliances, NATO's involvement would be crucial, and alliances could shift in unexpected ways. Countries like Turkey, Poland, the Baltics would be key in defensive strategies. Yeah, the alliances is a very interesting one. I think China holds a lot of power at the moment that they probably do realize, but nobody's talking about in the media. They're a huge player in the amount of arms they can bring to the table, the amount of technology they can bring to the table. If they suddenly decided to throw everything behind Russia because the US has pulled out of NATO and US is the superpower over there and they want to be the superpower over here and Europe's just going to get... I don't think we've got the manufacturing power to combat that. Economic collapse is point 3. The war would disrupt global supply chains and cause widespread economic instability. The UK would face financial crisis. We're already in one. While Russia's economy would collapse due to sanctions and wartime expenses. I'm not sure about that one because I think Russia's the kind of country that can sustain that. They're already putting a massive percentage of GDP into that, and that's not a be all. If it was us in this country, it'd be disastrous if we're spending 5% of GDP, or even if it was full wartime economy. We haven't got that same spirit as we had in World War II, where we're going to give in our pots and pans and cut our railings off to melt down to make Spitfires. It's just not the same country anymore. So yeah, I'm not sure about that. The economic collapse would be more devastating over here than it would ever be in Russia, in my eyes. To the people, I mean. Technological and cyber warfare. The advanced capabilities in both nations, cyber warfare and drone technology would play a significant role disrupting military operations and critical infrastructure on both sides. Well, yeah, that was the key, potential key factors that they've gone through. And yeah, we've mentioned all of them. So yeah, let me know what you think of that. Like I say, that was what AI thinks how it could pan out if it happens. Now, the worrying thing about that is that's based on no pretense. That's not based on current news. That's not based on what's happening now. That is complete and completely separate from current events and based on theoretical. So, as if none of this had happened in the news, if the Ukraine war wasn't going on, that's just how a computer thinks this country and this country would go at it. How many things in that are accurate and to current events? That is very worrying to me, because the processing power that's used for that is faster than I can think and talk. So yeah, it is very concerning, and I think we're already in it. Hopefully it'll de-escalate, but I do think, if you've not already started, if you've been considering prepping, now is the time to start. Not the time to go and panic buy, not the time to go and spend all your rent money on cans of beans, but start sensibly. Now's the time to make sure you've got them extra few tins. You start getting some bottled water. You make sure there's the odd torch there, because the effects from this war are not going to be initially affected by bombs coming over, doodle bugs and whistling and going down into Anderson shelters. It's not that generation anymore. It's going to be infrastructure. It's going to be the systems going down. It's going to be no access to your money. It's going to be no power for a week or two because they've hacked the system and we've got to try and get it back. It's going to be disruptions to the food supply. These are the things you prepare for. Yeah. You're not preparing for full on down in the bunker with your full ammo ready to fight the Ruskies landing on parachutes. It's not Red Dawn. It's a completely different type of warfare at the moment. It could escalate to that level. I'm not saying it couldn't. I don't want it to. I hope it never does. Hopefully reason will take control. We like to think that at some point somebody's going to think, hang on, lads, this is a bit stupid. Let's not do this. But it's not always the case. But we should prepare for the stuff that is already happening and we can see happening right in front of us and could escalate more. That's it for this one, guys. I thought that was very interesting to read through when I initially did it. So hopefully you guys found it interesting as well. Let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to leave me a like. If you're new to the channel, all sorts of prepping advice and a great community. So make sure you hit subscribe, and I will see you all in another video really soon. Goodbye.